Welcome again to a new episode of The Power of Possibility, a podcast from SBS. I'm Miguel, and today we're going to talk about how artificial intelligence is showing up in the workplace and what it actually means for employees and how organizations can use AI to support people, skills, and performance rather than creating fear or disruption. I'm joined by two leaders working closely with organizations in these kind of topics. First, I would like to introduce to you Jess Larsen. She's the founder of Thriving Humans, and with extensive experience advising organizations on how people and work and technology evolve together. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Nice,
Jess?
thank you. Sounds good.
Thank you. And we also have once more Nicole Mangarella. She's the head of global technology and innovation at SPS. Welcome, Nicole. She leads workplace technology and innovation and initiatives focused on enabling employees and improving day-to-day experience at work. So thank you for being here today. Maybe we should get started with the first question, an open question for both of you. You can decide who wants to start with this question, which is in day-to-day office work, where do you see AI removing real friction without reducing the value of human roles?
So we see an increase in the number of employees overall that are using AI day to day. We recently published a survey in conjunction with WorkTech where we found that about 75% of employees now report using AI at some level in some capacity in their day-to-day work. That's up about 16% from where it was last year. So it seems like more and more people are engaging with the tools, and those tools are being made more readily available. When we look at data from a variety of different surveys and different research, it shows that a lot of people are using it still for basic summarization, research, rewriting, and translation types of things. But we are starting to see more adoption of more complex AI workflows as businesses start to integrate it beyond just giving their teams access to the chat sorts of tools that are available.
Yeah, I would agree and add to that. I'd say we're sitting in the seat of talking with clients and working with clients and, actually hearing what companies are encountering. And often the conversations we're having are with AI leaders or people accountable for the change. And sometimes what they're sharing is frustration around how to encourage that adoption. So the people who are closest to understanding the technology and introducing it into companies often can see that it promises these new capabilities and they've got more exposure to what AI tooling can deliver. But often the people who are charged with introducing or transforming their AI enablement aren't actually in the delivery seats. So they sometimes are quite removed from, how do we actually make this work in marketing, or how do we make it work in sales, or how do we make it work in engineering or different parts of their business. And what we find is there's such a spread of experience. There's such a spread of readiness and I guess, different journeys that companies are on. And so often companies will be listening to what's happening in their own industry space or in, peers that they're relating to. But I think what we can see, and so they listen to the kind of the media narrative of, there's this massive disruptive impact that AI is having. And then on the other hand, AI is having no impact whatsoever and it's all a lie. And I would say, what I say to them is, both of those things are true at the same time, is that we have this huge variety of experiences happening. The risk is that people pick the bubble they're in and they decide that's the truth. And so if they get nothing else but this from this conversation, I would really challenge them to say, wherever you are on that journey, it's true that there'll be people who are at higher adoption spaces and there'll be people who are laggarding behind. And you can learn from both of those cases. We've talked quite a bit like, why is it good to be at the front of the pack and why is it sometimes better to be at the back of the pack? So lots of huge amounts of variation.
Many companies still approach AI mainly as a cost-cutting tool. Why can that be? Can that way of thinking be risky in the end?
Okay, I'm going to take this one first. So this is my sweet spot. So I come from a career, decades of experience in leading change initiatives, and particularly the people dimension of those changes. And this is not the first time in my career that we're working in an era of technology affecting work. Those of us who've been around a bit longer, will remember cloud transformation journeys 10, 15 years ago. Nicole's nodding. Anyone coming from the transformation landscape or the change ownership landscape is really familiar with this concept of you have tech comes into a business and you have to make everybody pay attention to that, and you have to somehow find a way that they're going to care about it, even people who feel a long way away from it. And often the problem is, how do you make it relevant to them and help them both understand what's happening and then actually care about it, right? And it's a classic change problem of learning as leadership, running these kind of changes of what is your story that you're telling. And by story, I don't mean the lie. I mean, hopefully it's true story, but it is a story in the sense of we're humans and we are very attached to narrative. It makes sense for people if we can turn it into a conversation that people can relate to and they can find themselves in. And I guess tapping into that kind of emotional experience that people have through change is absolutely critical. And that's something we're definitely finding, in supporting clients, that we work very much with technology experts, often who can see the potential of what can happen here. And then time and time again, they come to us and say, actually, the real problem is this people dimension of how the hell do we get these people to understand what's going on, want to do these things, actually make it happen. And so that landscape of behavioral impact, how do you get those pieces of your business to pull together is the work we do.
Yeah, and I think the cost cutting mindset, it comes from how people looked at some legacy software transformation. Typically, it was this process is very manual and it's very strict. It's very rigid. We need more flexibility. So we're going to change ERP systems. We're going to move to the cloud. We're going to create a data lake and get rid of all of these different data silos. And the goal typically was to calculate an ROI that would show that you had reduced cost in one area or another. And I think there's two aspects of AI that change that conversation. One, the ROI is difficult to calculate on AI because the cost structure keeps changing. The cost per token has been going down, but the licensing models get more expensive depending on how you're deploying it and which tools you're picking. So the complexity of trying to calculate how much cost you're actually reducing or at what point you're going to break even is really difficult to do these days. The other aspect of it is that while you may be reducing cost in one area, or you may have an opportunity to take out headcount or optimize a team, you also have the opportunity to then reinvest that and expand what people are doing. And the example that comes to mind is IKEA deployed AI in their customer service space. They said, if we put really, really good AI and conversational AI behind our customer support agents, we can reduce the time that it takes them to handle a request, and therefore they can handle more requests per day. And so we don't necessarily need as many people in support. And so you could make the decision to say, we're just going to reduce that headcount and we're going to take a cost savings and look at it that way. But what they decided to do is historically they had wanted to be able to offer interior design sort of consulting services, because if you're a furniture and a design company, how could you potentially grow your revenue? You could start a complementary business and a complementary service to go with it. And so those people that they had in customer service who knew their product lines really well, knew their customers really well, they took that knowledge and that capability and used AI to then upskill and reskill that headcount into a new service for their business. And I think that's a really great example of AI as something that unlocks more possibilities for what you can do as a business, not just, I can reduce my headcount and I can reduce my cost.
And I'm going to add to that, right? Because this is the temptation that we see businesses walking toward this trap over and over again. I mean, we had talked in preparation on the disaster story that Klarna had of going out to the market and declaring they were losing, I think, 700 roles in 2022 due to operational efficiencies, largely driven by AI, and then having to wind that back a couple of years later and recognizing the damage they had done, internally to their culture primarily, But, and I think most companies that I talk to can relate to that threat, that risk, and some of them have gone and made declarations or made indications, but a lot are sitting on the fence saying, we think we're going to achieve productivity gains with this. We don't know how to walk that tightrope of how do we kind of get from here to there without blowing up our company culture along the way? Because ultimately, the people who are going to be in that future state company are in the room already. That's going to have a massive impact on that talent landscape, let alone the people that you let go that go out into the market that massively damage your employer brand. And so we've got a couple of case studies of businesses who've done that damage, and of course there's a huge narrative externally. There's no shortage of articles of like, why not to do this? And what I would want to add, because the example you've given with IKEA is so nice, there are quite a few that we have seen, and certainly one of the businesses I was in fact, a couple of the businesses I was in, we did work, we did a deep landscape of internal mobility, so looking really carefully at like, what is talent in this organization and how can we make that more malleable? How can we make that more transferable? How can we take the strengths that we have in the institutional knowledge and the types of behaviors that we have attracted and what we consider a really talent-dense environment? Like, we think the people that work here are fantastic, but they may not have exactly the skills we need. To your point with IKEA's example, what are the potential landscape of opportunities that we could see coming up? How can we evolve our people's skills towards that? How can we maybe take sacrifices so we don't go and pick the ready-made candidate from externally, but we do the work internally? We actually try to train that person up, or we give them exposure to these opportunities. In one business that I was in, we doubled the rate of internal mobility every year. It was a huge effort. It takes a lot of work. But the knock-on of that was that engagement went up 12%, like huge. And so people recognized it, and that was a drumbeat of messaging to say, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. You've told us that you want more career progression. These are all the things we're going to do and all the things we're going to measure. And it was really hard. It's really hard holding managers to the fire to say, you have to exhaust the internal talent pools before you're allowed to look outside. And they're convinced that they have to get this external talent in. And I would argue that's the work that I would hope that most businesses are like really digging deep on that stuff, because if you throw those people out the door today, the message you're sending is these often, you've got values on the wall, you're relying on the trust and respect that your people have for your ambitions. But once you start treating people as commodities and you send those messages of, hey, everyone here is disposable, you've lost a huge amount of, people's engagement and productivity and performance. And that is incredibly hard to recover from. Like, it's always easier to get the first time. It's more than twice as much work to make it back if you damage it.
It's interesting, too, when you look at how people are measuring the gains that they are starting to see in AI. And almost every measurement that I've seen in the space has been fractional hours saved from an employee's day. So you have, depending on the department and depending on the level of seniority and depending on the job, it's 9 hours a week, 2 hours a week, 12 hours a week. And it's not the full amount for that employee, but I think it was Shopify who came out and said, we want this to be employees' opportunity to stretch and to use the knowledge that they have about the company, about the culture, about what our customers need, what our partners need as a business, and use that extra 2 hours a week to play around with some of the AI tools and maybe create something that you would have never thought you had the potential to create, but the business, the culture, you're invested in what we're doing, and then you get more innovation and better ideas out of that. I haven't seen the results from Shopify on the new ideas that have created with that, but it's interesting when you look at if you have an extra 6 hours of time, 10 hours of time, how do you help people then use that to amplify what they can bring to the company?
I mean, well, that's massive. I mean, that's what every company needs. Like, we definitely have worked with clients who have dedicated learning time. So they've taken from workforce planning capacity for learning, capacity for experimentation. And arguably, like, anyone who's worked in change practice before knows, like, this stuff takes time. It takes resources. So any company that is proposing that they're on this journey and they're not allowing for that flex and stretch, it's a really good point of linking together. Okay, we're seeing the advantages and the gains. it has to then be allocated into this learning and growth, because where companies have to go to make this stuff work is into this landscape of experimentation and innovation, right? And we know innovation, like for it to succeed, anyone who's worked in design or in, tech's been a really good playground for this for a long time of, like, you have to have that ability to fail. And so ability to fail, the conditions for that, you need the resources, you need the time, you need the culture of trust, and you need like clear guardrails and sandboxing. So you've got agreement of what are we allowed to break, what are we not allowed to break. But those aspects, as you're describing, where you're starting to see the productivity gains, like what a great model to load that then into the learning culture. Because I've definitely spoken with clients who are struggling because they haven't made that clear link of, oh, we're trying to get our people to this new capability set. We're trying to upskill them, but actually we haven't allocated the time, to do that. Or we haven't taken work off the table. Yeah.
You were talking about the layoffs that we've seen in the big, large companies, tech companies, while artificial intelligence keeps growing. And what message does that send to employees? I mean, how can it hurt companies in the long run?
Yeah, I mean, this is such an interesting one because I would say for years there's been this tension in the world of talent, talent specialists and the world of HR people, of that there has been not enough of the highest quality talent. So you're kind of coming at the talent landscape with a very competitive mindset. And then we have this tension of real job lossage. Yeah, I definitely know of scores of people who are in the market now who didn't expect to be, as an indirect or direct result of AI implementation. So they're absolute, and I actually personally believe that the rate of layoffs is possibly higher than we're kind of seeing come through the stats, because there's a bit of a shadow workforce of people going into consultancy or into, contract work, or kind of not picking up on the official records a bit. So and sometimes it's hard to track those numbers accurately, but regardless, they're definitely real. So the tension that we used to have to say, we have to do everything we can to protect our brand because it's that important. That argument is actually being challenged a bit, I know, inside of companies to say, well, if there's all these people in the market, does it really matter that much what our brand is? Does it really matter if we're hyper competitive? Actually, maybe we're going to get pick of the month and we don't have to struggle with that anymore. I think that's a bit of a dangerous take for a couple of reasons. One is that your employer brand, like, yes, it matters what the external landscape, sees you as, but more profoundly, it's your internal landscape. It's like, this is your existing talent, like the people who are already with you in the room. And in my experience working with, leadership bodies, there's often, they tend to overestimate the reception of the culture and how well people are finding things. And often, you'll come if you work with engagement survey data or you work with sentiment data and you bring back, this is what people actually think. And you'll get leaders go, why would they think that? It's great here. They tend to have this bias of positivity, right? They think things because they are arguably in privileged seats. They get more autonomy. The things that are harder, often down the tree, is harder for leaders to accept. But it's the truth. And I would argue that the mode that most companies on these journeys are needing to go on, which is almost a loosening of their structures and a figuring out how can this technology, how can we bed this tech into our organizations? The answers to those questions are going to come from the people in the room. I've worked with leadership teams and AI owners of these implementation plans saying, I don't know how this tech's going to affect people in sales. I don't know how it's going to affect, it's the people doing that work that need to come and they need to come with the why, arguably what is it we're trying to solve for? They still own that business, that piece of the business delivery. And so it's always a partnership of understanding what the tech can do, but then still meeting that delivery need for the business. And I think that, if we underestimate how important it is to emotionally take people with us on that journey, we already have some really interesting stats we're looking at over the past few months have come out around active sabotage of employees around AI is on the increase, which is hugely concerning. In the US, it looks the worst out of all of the geographies, and they're saying, the stats I saw, I think 66% of specific generation, the Gen Z generation, reporting that they are telling the survey that they're actively sabotaging, and that might be that they're disclosing data out to AI that they know that they shouldn't be under the company policy, or that they're doing things to have the AI output look less successful than it actually is. So having employees actively sabotage a change program is a major red flag. And I would argue at that point, you really want to be doing some honesty assessments of how can we repair trust in the delivery of this change. And we're talking about people losing their jobs. That's got to be one of the biggest threats that any of us are going to have at work. And yeah, it's really hard for companies to go and provide 100% security to people. But arguably, we know that the route to security is going to be the value that the person's going to be in the business model. And so with most of our clients we're working with, how do we help people in the room understand that emotional journey that people are on? How can they, with honest reactions, not trying to build an artificial story, but genuinely tell the story of, we want you to be on that journey with us. We want to upskill you as we go. Like, these are the pieces we know on that journey so far, but you're going to come with some of the answers to that. And so then you've got a collaborative change exercise going through. And I know from your background, Nicole, as we've talked about in tech transformation, like that work of buy-in and that work of emotional kind of engagement underpins everything.
In the end, I guess that there are certain kinds of tasks that we should do in order to make employees to stay confident with AI. I mean, what new skills should employees start building now to stay confident?
Wow.
and relevant?
I think that depends overall on the role and the specific function. I will say, and I saw the same study on the sabotage, and I think it was as high as 1 in 3 at a company are actively sabotaging AI initiatives, because sometimes the way those initiatives are messaged are, it sort of feels like you're sharpening the axe that's going to chop off your head. And it does make it hard to want to learn those new skills, or to believe that learning that skill is going to help you advance. And so I think there's critical thinking skills will never go out of style. I think the ability to learn how to interact with it in a safe way and in an effective way is something that's baseline. There is a wealth of information out there for prompting tutorials. There are lots of different ways to learn about how you can use the technology, and many of them are free, in addition to the company-sponsored initiatives that are going to be more specific to use cases. But from a skills standpoint, I think there is that real concern that if I don't learn these skills, I'm going to be the lowest performing employee, however performance is measured within that organization. And so the best way to learn about technology is a hands-on way, to test it out, to try what's available. I think companies that have created those types of environments where they've given access to tools and let people play around with it, it's helpful for people from an introductory standpoint, but then you do need to have that next level up for people who are, I'm comfortable with this, I'm using it in my daily, outside of work life. How can I make sure that this is applicable to my job, and how can I make sure that that's recognized within the business as me being more effective in my role and maybe ready for the next opportunity?
We've actually developed a mindset shift model for our clients, and critical thinking is up there. That's one of the pillars. And critical thinking, we talk about that as, I liken this to when I've delivered leadership development work in the past. You talk about when someone makes a transition from a frontline manager to a manager of managers, that suddenly you're in a position where you're accountable for other people's delivery, who are very capable, but you can't oversee everything that they're doing, and there's like another layer through them. And we liken the potential of agentic structure to that equation of what does that feel like. and when delivering that leadership development over the years, I've had many conversations with leaders trying to make that transition and being like, how the hell am I supposed to be successful? How am I supposed to trust these people? Like, how do we make this work, right? Because it's a very uncomfortable position to be in, to kind of let go of control, but then have enough governance and accountability that it actually is going to function successfully. And I would argue, one of the tenets that we take our clients through is that the potential of AI enablement arguably kind of shifts everyone in our structures into that mode of like, all of a sudden, those capabilities that we used to consider just for our senior leadership, everyone has to start adopting that thinking and those skills of how do I like be accountable for things that I'm not directly controlling. And I've heard quite a few themes of, preserving this really tight relationship to the human is always accountable for that decision. And so how do you put people in positions that they feel comfortable with that? How much governance then is needed through that chain? Because that's definitely the world that some people are living in today. And I don't know that we've done enough cultural work and behavioral work with people to really make that as clear as it could be. And I suspect that we will see, horror stories of things gone wrong, of outcomes. And I think people right at the front line, like certainly through engineering structures I've spoken to, there's some real concern about how far agentic delivery is going, and the discomfort of being accountable for things that they're losing direct control over. And I think we've got more work to do as businesses with that, of how do we design that out?
Now that you've mentioned about critical thinking, which is a really high task that we should keep, in a daily basis, there's like a feeling that sometimes when using artificial intelligence, employees can lose a little bit of abilities or skills.
Yeah, de-skilling.
Like you feel a little dumb sometimes when using too much artificial intelligence. So how can companies balance this thing?
Yeah, I think this is hugely risky. And I've definitely heard people increasingly start to talk about it, which is great. There's a really good study actually in medical journals that came out about 2 months ago, and they have measured, I think it's radiographers or a specific skill set where they had started adopting AI, and the individual's ability to assess reports. So what they would have done manually before, and then they started applying AI to that recognition pattern, is that then they tested that the human's recognition pattern ability a couple of months. It was only 3 months through the test, and it had dropped by, I think it was 4 percentage points, which was considered statistically, a really strong indicator of deficiency. So we know that from neurological understanding that what we, our brain is a muscle, that what we don't use, our brain naturally recycles, it atrophies, we let go of those skills. Same with memories. If we're not spending time in that cognition, then, we lose those abilities. And I am very concerned as somebody with an experience of designing work and designing workflows and working in parts of business where we design what people are doing and designing what behaviors, what skills do we need in our business, whether enough attention is being given to the risks of, if we outsource this, are we okay with that leaving the room in our company? And kind of the work, I did some work recently on apprenticeship flows, which was super interesting. What's happening for early career, a whole different conversation. But arguably, like, similar problem in a different dimension of trying to get these early career people exposure to stuff, and that some businesses are doing workarounds where they're consciously choosing to preserve some pieces of work and saying, well, this could go to AI, but actually it's so important that we have that developmental path that we're going to protect it over outsourcing it. So we're going to over-optimize for our internal capability over productivity. And I think that question should be like front and center for anyone doing this redesign of what are we trading.
I do think I saw it wasn't the one in science, but there was one in MIT that was basically the conclusion was ChatGPT will rot your brain, which I think is interesting because I can remember like how many phone numbers can you recall off the top of your head? There's people that you talk to every day that at one point you would have been able to do like that. And now it's kind of a skill that we've let go of. But if you wanted to build a website, you would probably be better equipped to do that than it would be to recall a bunch of phone numbers. And so I think there is, in some cases, it's good that we're losing some of these skills that have been necessary in the past, but aren't as necessary in the future. I think the biggest piece that is the gap is the quality level, because AI can definitely do it faster, and in some cases it can do something that looks like it's 5 people's worth of work, so it's a bit cheaper, but the quality gap is pretty high, especially when it's unassisted. And I think that's where there's a lot of promise in AI agents, but it hasn't fully been realized independently yet. It's more of a collaborative effort. They had there was a study recently that Scale AI and the Center for AI Safety did around the ability for online agents to take tasks that would normally be put on like a TaskRabbit or a Fiverr, and to do those tasks to completion. And it was things like logo design, game development, make a video out of this information. And what they found, they started the study in October. They called it the Remote Labor Index. And they found that even the best models out there, if you gave them the task independently, could only fully complete it to the right level of human quality 2.5% of the time.
Wow.
So it was very, very low. And then they redid the study again recently, and the best model is up to about 4%. So I do still think that knowing how to use AI has become its own skill in and of itself. And it's really that human plus AI augmentation that ends up getting you the best results. And so if it's things that you don't necessarily care about the quality, you just want it done, you have a high tolerance for issues
Quality
and for your
lag.
inaccuracy. Exactly. Those are the best use cases where it's okay, this just has to get done, and if there's a little bit of an error, it's fine. But I think that skill of how you incorporate that in is as basic as people learning to use graphical interfaces or learning to use command line or all of the computer skills that have come before this. It's just a new way to kind of leverage that technology, and it becomes its skill in its own right while some of the other skills go away. I do think the part on losing creativity and the ability to communicate is a little bit overblown, because the writing that comes out of it is still not the same level of quality. And even if you have it, it has some great ideas. It's a fantastic brainstorming tool, which is ultimately, I think, what the MIT study concludes, is that it's really helpful for getting that starting point and moving things forward, but the quality just still isn't there in a lot of areas compared to what you get from people.
I think the relational piece, and I don't know if I'm understanding you properly, but the some of the skills that we have as humans are going to become much more important.
Yes.
So when you ask what are the skills that we need, there's been a lot of commentary around the need for empathy. And then there have been some interesting studies demonstrating that, in fact, AI is quite good at demonstrating empathy if we train it well. And I would which I think is quite threatening for people, right? And I think there's a distinction there between, so empathy in this case, the study I'm talking about was one where they, in fact, were looking at doctors, and I think anybody who's had problems with their doctors around empathy will relate to this, is training an AI tool to elicit empathetic reactions was the experience of patients was far more positive in using the tools than it was using the human being. And there's good reasons for that, right? As you think a doctor, and I always think this when I go in to see the GP, is like, I think, oh God, poor them. They're sitting in this incredibly stressed schedule. They're trying to deal with things with often quite high threat for people, where people's emotional reactions are really triggered, and then they have to be quite transactional with it. And so there's this combination of factors that makes that work really hard. It's really hard for humans to be empathetic, right? It's a skill we know there's a deficiency, there's acknowledged deficiency for people in the medical practices, right, which they've done a lot to try to counter over the last few decades. And then it's so interesting to find a tool that, in fact, is a mechanical tool which can in fact deliver an experience of empathy for humans if we put enough of a framework in there for it to reference. The bit that I see as a continued gap is the relational empathy. So the experience of a human, and this is where we go into a bit of a woo-woo landscape that we don't talk a lot about in business settings, but I think I'm predicting is going to become a lot more important. It's something like, the distinctions we talked about a lot through the pandemic when we all moved to remote. There was a lot of conversation, certainly in the HR circles and people circles, of the quality of relationships at work and what that was doing to employees' engagement and kind of nervous system regulation and therefore productivity. So people were operating in a landscape that with tremendously high threat, like whatever their personal situation was, there's a lot of people feeling super freaked out and going into bad places. That the quality of people's relationships at work suddenly became really, really important. And then we all had to do it virtually. And so there was, at the time, there was a real surge of learning about how do we engage more empathetically remotely. So we put our cameras on, we try to...
Personally, right?
Yeah, like how do we create these like human moments of connection that trigger an emotional reaction in us as animals ultimately, right? And I would argue we know that like when people get together physically that there's a whole different impact in the quality of relationship that can be created almost instantly. And I say in the world of work, we've got more to go and learning more about that and embedding that into how we're operating, right? And this is kind of some of the work we've been playing with at Thriving Humans. It's really fascinating of like, who are we as human animals? Because we don't do enough when we think about work. We're very much in this cognitive headspace of solving practical problems, but not necessarily relating to ourselves as, hey, we're animalistic creatures. You have all these emotions going on all the time, which are impacting the quality of our thinking, the quality of our decisions, the quality of how we're communicating, and ultimately how we can succeed as a business. But we don't talk about that a great deal. And I think it's very interesting that we're at this point of divergence, that we have tools now that have been proven to deliver that empathy, but ultimately it does not create that relationship value. And we've heard, probably the disaster stories of, particularly young people growing attachment to AI. We see that as a risk socially, that's starting to be acknowledged. And I would say in the workplace, there's an opportunity there to say, well, how do we reconnect and preserve those moments of relational integrity? Like, how do we help people build deeper quality relationships at work with integrity and with trust and all the factors we've talked about with change management? Like, anyone who's gone through hard change knows trust is the thing that has it work. It's like, well, if the trust is not there, it doesn't work. If the trust is there, you can do amazing things. And so, it's this human experience of like, who are we as a team? Do I know this person? Do I understand them? Do I get them? Are they on the same page as me? Can I trust them? Like, do I get them as a human? So right back to our human skills.
Yeah, we see it a lot from a workplace services perspective. We do a lot of workplace ambassadors, which is, they're the face that you see in the office that helps you access all the services that support you being able to do the work that you do without necessarily getting bogged down in the details on things.
Yeah.
And the technology has been there for years to do most of it through digital ticketing systems. You can have a virtual receptionist. You can, like, the tech is there. The could is you could. You probably shouldn't in some cases because, an investment banker who's really stressed about getting a deck together for a meeting the next day wants to know and look at somebody who is accountable for what they're doing, and AI is not accountable.
Yeah.
So that personal relationship of being able to say, yep, I got you. We're going to make sure this gets done. You focus on, what you're going to, how you're going to interact with the client tomorrow, get some sleep, do that.
I trust you.
We've got the support structure in place. Sometimes might just want to submit a ticket, but I think the variety of options that people want in a workplace now I could do some of it with AI. Sometimes I want a person involved in that. We always want a person behind the scenes. I think the human in the loop piece to get to the level of quality that we spoke about earlier is still critical.
Yeah.
But it is a matter of just because we could necessarily do it with tech doesn't mean we should.
Yeah. Yeah.
we've talked about the social aspect about AI, etc., but we've never talked. We just haven't talked about the implementation, right? And I want to know what should be first: changing the tools or changing like the processes, the workflows.
Changing the tools, or let me pose that back maybe a different way. Changing the process or changing the tools. I think for me, it's about learning the potential of the tools, and and then I think the thing that's super exciting with AI is the potential for design. Like, I think design is, we don't have enough of those skills in businesses in general. And I think now is the time. Any designers out there, now is your time. I think businesses desperately need the mindsets and the skills of how do we reinvent things? Like, how do we reimagine like what could be possible? Because if we take an existing workflow and we take the pieces of it and we just put in automation, arguably, like, anyone who's gone deep in playing with AI capabilities will probably be like, no, because it, I've likened it to using Play-Doh. Like, it's so variable. Like, there's so many things that you can do that you couldn't do before, and so it's almost like seeing the potential of those things. And I find, like, what we were working with clients, some of it is upskilling on that potential, but some of it is just getting people in rooms and riffing. And so, we actually bring design thinking journeys that we deliver, workshops. We kind of do this work of like, what are your problems? And we look at these use cases, and then let's just start riffing. And we start pushing, do we run some innovation practices and things like, interestingly, you were saying AI is super good at coming up with ideas. I would argue that humans doing the hard work themselves on that is, I think we need to do that. I think that we need to preserve that, because gosh, my experience of playing with innovation, at one point I did some innovation training with MIT, and we had this exercise where we were given, half a day to come up with 20 ideas for such and such. And the next day we had to come up with 50, and it was like, what? And the next day it was 100. It's like, what? And of course, the longer the list got, the more crazy you started getting. You're just like, right, well, let's just put it all down. And it's that level of ideation that you start seeing, like, no idea is about, like, just start playing, and our play comes out. And that those muscles that, when we've been working through the work environment of trying to be right and trying to be perfect and trying to do the best version of everything, over and over again, that really stifles our natural innovation, our natural creativity. And I think what AI opens the door to is this whole different mode of creativity in business, because the cost has gone down, like the speed has gone down. And so trying to help our people think creatively, I think there's a lot of space for artists to come in the room, for, design experts. Like, we kind of need that thinking back in the room at the moment to challenge how we're thinking. Because if we just sit here with the tools and we start with that existing process and we redesign it, we're very likely missing out on, umpteen potential use cases because we haven't thought broadly enough.
I agree with that in principle. I think coming from the technology transformation side, I think you don't start with either one. You start with why you're doing it, because that gets everybody on the bus, gets something that everybody can believe in, points you in the direction of what you're trying to actually accomplish, why you've actually gotten everybody in the room and taken their time and you want their ideas. And if you start from that why and that belief and you get alignment and buy-in on that, then at this point, selfishly, you sort of do both at the same time. Like, my background, I come from ERP implementation and transformation. So selfishly, easily, we got to rip out the guts of how the business worked and then redesign the processes based on the new system, based on what the capabilities were there, based on how the business worked, based on what they were trying to accomplish. It becomes very collaborative between the technology and what's possible with the technology and the process that you ultimately want. Traditional software, typically you would start with, here's my process design, and then you pick the tools at the very end. I think with the flexibility and with the speed of the development of the capabilities of AI, you really do end up doing both interchangeably at the same time. But if you sit there and you look at it and you say, well, we want AI in this process because we think that it's going to help us be better, you need to go back to the drawing board and figure out why you think it's going to be better and what that why is. Maybe it could be, hey, we think that we can reduce our headcount by 10%. We think that this will help us compete better because we can release products faster if you're in manufacturing. Or we think that this is going to help us be more accurate and get better quality because the AI can do a first pass for us. And then by the time we get to the end of it, or for a lot of companies, there's also the opportunity of, we think this will give us better data coming out of that process at the end of the day that we can then use to figure out what are we doing well, what are we not doing well, where do we focus. But I think it does happen really at the same time. But if you don't have the why as the guiding light and the thing that gets everybody on the bus, then you sort of just spend a lot of time and energy and you don't really accomplish things.
Yeah, I'd say what she said. Like, do her thing first and then do my thing.
But I think it's hard to do, to be perfectly honest. And I don't, it's easy to say that, and sort of say, you should do this. It's really difficult to do in practice. It's not necessarily
Comfortable.
easy. It really isn't, because you are asking, you need to involve the people who are doing the process first and foremost, because they're the ones who are going to know it best. And sometimes there's a lot of there's a lot of legacy knowledge. There's a lot of, no, we've always done it this way. There are like personal aspects of it that you need to get past. But that work is worth doing if what you want at the end of the day is a real transformation. If you just want, we've got a procure to pay process that we don't really like and we want to optimize it, you can take that approach, but you need to be realistic about what's going to come out of that versus something at a broader scale.
But I think you need the people delivering the process today, but you also need your senior representation to answer the why.
Absolutely.
Because I definitely have been in the room watching processes get ripped up and realize that the operators who are very protective of that process, the question that they're trying to answer, actually the people that they're trying to answer for do not give a shit. There's I can't remember where it's from, but there's a really good business book that talks about, there was this particularly dense report they used to do on a monthly basis, and someone decided, I'm just going to stop sending that report to execs and see if anybody notices. And nobody noticed for like 3 or 4 months. And they're like, okay, so we don't need to do that anymore, because you do have these, particularly in more mature, definitely enterprise landscapes, where things are getting big enough and complex enough, where people lose touch with, who am I delivering this for and why and what do they actually care about? And it's back to business fundamentals of actually talking to each other and actually delivering efficient structures and all the rest of it.
We went into a huge investment company in the US to look at their document processing, and we talked to the business line owner about, okay, how do you sort out documents, how do you prioritize everything? He gives us very clear rule definitions, very well documented. This is how it's done. We train all our people, our team is very tenured, this is the standard, this is what you should find. We go, great. We go out onto the floor, we shadow the teams that are doing the work. We shadow one person. Yeah, okay, yep, that looks like the process. You've explained it in different words, but you're basically following the same rules. We go to another person and we find that they're doing it just slightly differently, but it's enough that we can't necessarily say this is the hard and fast way it should be done. And then it becomes a conversation of, why did you sort of adjust the way that you're doing it? Oh, because the information that we get from our clients actually doesn't match what leadership thinks we're getting from our clients. And it's not anybody's fault. It's not a misstep, but it's something that when you do that sort of process exploration, you really start to surface, and it becomes okay, how do we make sure that what we're taking forward is going to hit the right goal?
And drill with true facts rather than what we'd like it to look like.
Be easy if everything was very, very clear.
Now that you were talking about that, I just thought about the previous steps that companies should take in order to do the implementation of artificial intelligence. And what do you think about how relevant it is to have a proper data foundations and governance, for example? I know that this is a tricky question, but,
Yeah.
but it's
I
important.
know Nicole's going to grab the baton in about 2 seconds, but it's obviously fundamental. It's, it's like you're talking about technology that's sitting on top of a data landscape. I have seen some quite creative methods of like rates of cleanup or not cleanup, or like what can you get away with not scrubbing, and businesses walking forward without scrubbing, and then learning that garbage in, garbage out, and there's no value in that. And I just want to, before I pass the mic, I talked to a client last week who's telling me that this is a specific project in their business, and what they had been working on was translating data into essentially a semantic vocabulary which was agreed in their AI structure, so that the terminology that's being used, so this is more about, if you think, what is this data? So we have a data point that sits here that we call this, like, what does that actually represent? So not just the data quality of, is it accurate, but do we understand it? And are we using it consistently? And do we have consistent understanding? And where does it travel through our systems, et cetera? So, I know all the data analysts will be either exhausted on the floor or rubbing their hands at the opportunity to get to this, but anyone I think who works in the landscape of data, like, as we all know, playing with the LLMs, that whatever you put in, you've got high risk on what you get back out. So
Yeah, I mean, to your earlier question, good process design creates good data at the end of the day. I think that if you're redesigning things from a process standpoint, having somebody in the room who understands the impact of the data that's going to produce really helps to make sure that you have something that you can use at the end of the day. I think I have yet to ever speak with a company that says we're really, really good with the way that we manage all of our data. It's not, everybody feels like, I should have my data in a better place before I start. The best time to plant a tree was 5 years ago. The second best time is right now. Like you can still start. It's not an insurmountable task. It is really difficult work because, exactly as you said, you need people who understand what that data represents and what its significance is. I think some of the AI tooling that's available can help with that cleanup process. So it depends what you want to do with it. AI, if you just put a RAG model on top of a set of data, usually you'll find if it's a significant amount, you've got duplication, you've got conflicting information, you've got things that it will surface so that it points you in the direction of where you need to focus your attention. What we've also seen is it kind of unlocks data that previously would have been too difficult for us to consider. So, for example, you have a lot of unstructured data out there. It tends to be one of the biggest problems for organizations is to be able to put some sort of sense around that unstructured information and get value out of it. We've seen, as a very simple use case, AI be really helpful for getting better information out of ticketing systems, so that if you have a ticketing queue that's for shipping and customs questions, and people put in free text and they have a lot of different questions. Maybe they're disputing a customs invoice, maybe a shipment got lost, maybe they're trying to ask if they can ship certain things in certain regions. We can now feed that into AI models and get out reporting that says, actually, you've got a lot of confusion about hazardous goods shipping. Here's how we can structure a training program. Here's the groups that have those questions. And so it unlocks the potential of getting more information out of things that are happening in the organization. But it is, exactly as you said, garbage in, garbage out. You need the attention and the governance around the information that you have to make sure that it's not spitting out bad answers, hallucinating, coming up with numbers that don't make sense.
Yeah, I think the potential on the data side is so exciting. Like, as you say, I've seen AI use cases of auditing landscapes where you might have, even in internal communications, you've got different versions of guidance out in different places, or, you'll have your internal internal communication portals are saying one thing, and then you've got policies out over here, and in another country in the business it's saying over here, and that used to be a job of someone physically having to go around and find all this stuff, and now it's a case where if you can connect those systems and you can set an agent to work to go and play with that and put it into a synchronized setting and say, well, what's the impact of this, that, and the other, then you've got the ability to increase your hygiene like at speed. So I think it comes back to your skills in your business of like, who do you have in your business that has enough awareness and understanding both of what your like legacy data landscape looks like and why, because that story is often quite important, as you say, of like, why are we doing this? Like, there is a reason.
Always the why.
Or is there not a reason? Sometimes it's inherited and we can let it go now. But also what is that potential? Like, where do we want to go to? Like, what should we be aiming for in our data landscape? Because I think that those skills organizationally are just becoming increasingly significant. Like, what we're talking about is ultimately like the increasing digitization of our businesses. And I think what AI is promising is that it's digitizing industries that have been less touched by digitization in the past, and that's where we're getting more and more people into this narrative that before was much more in the knowledge-based industries where that's their bread and butter, and you've got much more digitally native people. But in my world, I'm working also with industry spaces where this is not the norm, and so you're having to do a big upskill not only on AI but actually just digitization and like, why does data matter, so it's quite fundamental stuff. And I think assessing the landscape of what's our starting point is really important, so you're not being super ambitious or not setting yourself up for fail.
Yeah, it's also a really good point of the digitization aspect of it. There are a lot of instances where you use people as databases, essentially. There's a lot of knowledge in people's heads. And what we also find a lot of the time is if there isn't a system and there isn't a method for getting that information into the system, then you have to solve the system problem first before you can really realize the analysis that you want to do on top of it. And so sometimes it's, hey, we really want to be able to do this. We want to understand this about our workplace or our adoption rates or how people are engaging with our workspace and our services and things like that. But it points back to where would you get that information from and what sorts of things could we pull together? Okay, we need to create a home for this information so that we can do that type of analysis.
I'm afraid that today we don't have more time. There are a lot of topics that we can introduce, but that was the last questions for today's episode. Thanks a lot for being here today in this podcast. And I also want to thank you, all of you listening at home or at your offices. Remember that you can listen to us in Spotify, in YouTube, and also in Amazon, in Apple. Thank you. See you next time.
Thanks so much.